So, I was just doing my thing. And Raffaella left the set. She went to Europe, and she came back. And she was gone about a week. And she said, "Hey, Michael, I was over at Pinewood Studios, and I saw you at Pinewood." And I said, "Excuse me?" Yeah, I was just over at Pinewood Studios, and you were there too, weren't you? And she was playing around. I'm like, "Raffaella, what are you talking about?" And she then went on to describe to me a Hicks-like figure with my likeness on it, with Hicks's chest completely blown out, as if one of the face huggers had blown out of his chest. And I was like, really? That's what they did with Hicks? And, I was at that moment, I was pissed because, I put time and love and care and effort into that, and so had Jim Cameron. Now, a lot of people they'll say to me, "How could they have done this to you? How could they have done this to your character?" The fact of the matter is that Jim Cameron spent the last third of Aliens, his movie, saving Newt, and they fucking kill her too. I mean, the fucking ludicrously stupidness of all of this is just insane.
They pretty well closed the door on following up with.
You were a studio guy, Jim. You can identify with some of this shit, right?
That's the product of studio development thinking. That's for sure. Yeah. So they killed off any possibility of following up on Jim's storyline from Aliens.
Yeah.
And
looking back on it too, the person that everybody really needed to please one way or the other. I've just thought about this in the last couple of days. Really, the person that really had to, the bear in the room or whatever they call it, would have been
the 800-pound gorilla.
The 800-pound, that had to have been Sigourney. Yeah. So, Sigourney, and, I love Sigourney. I love her to death. She was so kind to me, and she's so wonderful, and she'll always be wonderful. And God knows what was going on with David Fincher.
She was kind of a source of strength on that movie, too, wasn't she, on Aliens?
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
But anyway, David Fincher was directing it, and he hadn't had any credits at that time. He was a pretty new guy. And David Fincher, who went on to win Academy Awards for the Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, what was that movie called?
Seven.
Seven.
Social Network. He had, he's got some great credits for sure. The Game, which I think is a real intriguing movie.
Well, he had all sorts of problems on this movie. He is quoted as saying, "Nobody hates Alien 3 as much as I do." Okay? So
it had a really bad word of mouth. I never saw it because I heard it was dark and pointless, and it was set on a prison camp on a planet, deserted, god-awful planet somewhere. Newt and Hicks were dead. And Newt and Hicks were dead, and it's Sigourney and Winona Ryder, kind of moping around for the whole movie. I didn't particularly care to see that.
Well, you and a lot of other people, I think.
Me and most of the other audience for the other two movies. Yeah.
And from what I understand, from what I've read now, since then, David Fincher was a young guy, was just getting pushed all over the place, by the studios. Yeah. So anyway, when I found out they had used a likeness of me, and they had Hicks's chest blown out, I obviously picked up the phone and called my agent, the person that we've talked about before a lot, and that was Ed L'Amato, who's at that point now handling Mel Gibson, and he's handling Richard Gere, and he's handling Michelle Pfeiffer.
Denzel. Yeah. So, and Steve Martin and Liam Neeson.
Exactly. He's got all sorts of, and he calls them up. And there was a movie There's a movie, obviously we all know Back to the Future. When they did Back to the Future 2, they took Crispin Glover's likeness and they used it in Back to the Future 2. And Crispin Glover, God bless him, man, he sued, if I'm not mistaken, he sued Steven Spielberg and Universal Studios for them using his likeness in the movie and not paying for it. And he won that lawsuit. And so there was precedent that you can't just take Michael Biehn's image of Hicks and do whatever you want with it without paying him.
In subsequent productions, yeah.
Exactly. So Ed called them up, and and I said to Ed, look, I don't give a shit about the movie one way or the other, but there's no way that I'm going to, because they started saying, well, we'll pay you $100,000. Right? And I was like, I don't need your money, but there was no way Hicks was going to go out like that in my mind. And that's what I said to Ed L'Amato. There's no way that character ends up with fucking last image of him is laying on the ground with some fucking thing coming out of his chest all burst open. I said, fuck that. And so we went back and forth with what would have been Fox, Jim?
Yeah, it would have been Fox.
Yeah. And, we ended up, David Fincher called me. And I don't remember the conversation very much except for me saying, well, fuck you and fuck this fucking movie. And there was a lot of F-bombs in that conversation. Of course, I didn't know he was going to go on to become David Fincher. I was pissed at what they had done. And I can feel myself getting angry now about what they had done to Hicks. It still kind of resonates, like what they thought they could do with Hicks, let alone like the little girl. So so anyway, after me cussing him out and telling him to go fuck himself, and again, Fincher had probably 30 other problems on that movie that were way bigger in his head and much more divisive for him than this thing. I mean, to me, it sounds like everybody was just pushing him this way and that way, and it just sounded like a disaster for him, and I feel bad for him. But anyway, I didn't feel bad for him when he called me to say, hey, are you sure we can't leave this in? I understand they're going to pay you some money. And I said, no. I said, absolutely not. So what we eventually ended up doing was that image that they had already shot, and that's what Raffaella had seen, was the dummy laying there after it had been used. And sometimes stuff like that, well, they're not going to use it anymore, it just sits around, And that's what she had seen when she was over there. I mean, who knows what would have happened if she hadn't seen that, and that would have just came out in the movie. I mean, that would have been probably a big-ass lawsuit that I would have won. But anyway.